Welcome to San Diego Integral, July 8th, 2023. Our topic today, Integral Prayer, a participatory prayer for transformation and divine becoming, presented by Luke Healy.
Welcome everybody to San Diego Integral. I'm Kathleen Andrews and I'll be the host today, and then also we'll be having some breakout sessions. So I'm your tech host for that. I'm a member of San Diego Integral's leadership team, along with the other two who are here today are Eloy Mays and Tom Habib. So we give a shout out to them for arranging everything and giving this the grounding so that we are here. We have an exciting presentation today with Luke Healy from Integral Christian Network. He's the co-founder of the Integral Christian Network, an endeavor to further the loving evolution of Christian consciousness and embodied mystical practice. We'll begin shortly, but just for little opening remarks, I wanted to mention that we're recording this meeting, and the link for this recording will be posted on Meetup in a couple days. You can also find us on YouTube. We've got the recordings from past events under the San Diego Integral. If you use that search word, you'll find the previous recordings. If you'd prefer not to be seen on video, just turn off your camera and type any questions you have in the chat box. But we do want people to have their cameras on, especially when we're in our breakout groups. This is really interactive. We like this for getting to know each other and integrate and process and learn from each other. You can find information about this event and future events on our website, which is sandiegointegral.org. We are also on Meetup and Facebook. You can find those links. Please join one of those links, so then when we create the new events, you'll be automatically notified. And if you ever have questions or comments about these meetings, or want to become more involved, you're welcome to contact one of the people on the leadership team through Meetup or Facebook. Wanted to mention next month, we don't have the full information for including the bio and program description but we have confirmed that on August 12th, we'll have Jeff Fitch from Pacific Integral on board. So please save the date for that. It's 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific time. Finally, we want to suggest you make a small donation for today. Donations help cover the Meetup fees and tech hosting. Meetup keeps increasing your fees. You can make that donation on the sandiegointegral.org website. And right now I want to ask whether there's anybody that's here for the first time that wants to say where they're from and how they found us. I think Elzin Osbey. I don't recognize seeing your name here before. If you wanted to introduce yourself, and anybody else that's here for the first time.
I'll introduce Elton. She's in San Diego. She's part of another group I'm in. So she might just have to be off camera for a bit. So
understood.
Thank you.
Stephen, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Just discovered your group browsing on Meetup this evening. So it's the first time I heard about it, and I'm really excited to learn more.
Nice. Welcome. That's all the new people we have. I will invite Shara to the virtual stage. I can give an introduction to Shara. She's one of our ministers at Unity of Tustin, who was just ordained this past, not much more than a week ago. So she's near and dear to my heart, and for all she's doing for modern spirituality of an evolutionary flavor. So go ahead, Shara.
Well, thank you, Kathy. It's wonderful to be here. I'm grateful everyone's joining us on this lovely summer night. My name's Shara, and I'm a fairly regular participant here at San Diego Integral. And I'm also a collegial soul friend of sorts of both Integral Christian Network and Luke Healy. So I am delighted to be able to introduce you, Luke, tonight, this evening. So Luke Healy is the co-founder of Integral Christian Network, whose intentional purpose is to further the loving evolution of Christian consciousness and embodied mystical practice. He's passionate about pioneering innovation in the form of spiritual community and making the mystical experience of God accessible in individual and collective practice. Luke is deeply compelled to gather together scattered mystics and evolutionaries. So many of us may identify as that. And I've experienced firsthand how Luke centers his life work to create meaningful connection and foster participatory and creative mysticism to bring about greater consciousness, freedom, and love. So on a personal note, I'd like to say that my participation in the whole body mystical awakening and resonating prayer practice that Luke is going to introduce to us has really catalyzed my own practice so powerfully that I, in turn, am introducing it into my spiritual community and unity movement. So the way I see it is we need to develop new capacities to meet the needs of our volatile, uncertain, changing, ambiguous, and so very beautiful world. And my participation with this practice has helped me embody these new capacities and knowings that really arise from my participation with collective emergence itself. And to me, that's exciting because the knowings that come, they're inherently transegoic because they come from the we, not from the me, the new organism of our interbeing. And my hope is that you all get a taste of such experience tonight with Luke as well. So let's take off and see what happens. And with that, I'm thrilled to throw the virtual stick over to you. It's great to see you tonight, Luke, and take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Shara. Really appreciate that lovely, warm introduction. And it's so good to be here with you all. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to sharing and practicing together today. We're going to start with a little bit of a meditation practice. Shara mentioned whole body mystical awakening, which is one of our core practices at Integral Christian Network. So I'm just going to guide us in a maybe 5-minute practice of that. And it's really to welcome our embodied integrated presence, because I want everything that we engage with here to be met with not just our head, our mental consciousness, right, but to really bring in our whole body, bringing forward all of our ways of knowing and welcoming all of the structures of consciousness that we contain within us. So the practice might be a little unfamiliar to some of you, so feel free to go with the guidance or not. Just move into that integrated presence and fullness in whatever way you feel drawn to do. But if you'd like, we can just begin by receiving a moment to center into our bodies, perhaps closing our eyes just for a moment as we breathe and allow the breath to bring us into our chest, into our lungs, as we welcome our heartful presence here in this moment. Let yourself welcome the consciousness and knowing of your heart center that is here now in this moment. Perhaps welcoming the deep heart of divine love, emanating with presence here and now. And next, I invite us to welcome our consciousness through our feet. Perhaps wiggle your toes or press your feet gently against the floor beneath you, coming into your grounded presence, rooting into the earth. And the energy of material reality that is interfused with the divine, breathing that up into your feet and legs as a part of nature, as a part of this earth, and grounded in the here and now, in this vast cosmos. Next, we might welcome our awareness in the space of our belly, our gut, or sometimes we call it the spiritual womb, breathing deep down into this space of deep being, the ground of our being, and core identity, resting in the warm embrace of our connection to Source and the divine wellspring that flows up into each one of us. And with this deep center in our belly, the grounding in our feet, and the radiant heart, we can welcome our awareness and our head center, integrated and connected with our whole body, and into a space of open receptivity, present in our whole being. So we can open our eyes and bring that full presence here into the shared space among us. And today we're going to talk about prayer, not in the traditional sense. Perhaps some of you here have some sort of prayer practice or had one in the past. I'm pretty certain most everyone here at least has a meditation practice or other spiritual practice. But whether you pray or not, whether you believe in a personal God or a form of divine presence that we can communicate with, prayer is one of the oldest spiritual acts in humanity. Its lineage and cosmic grooves run deep in us. So today we're going to consider an integral approach to prayer that is embodied and participatory. We're going to consider it and practice it a little. This prayer welcomes each of the three faces of God and our divine participation in ourselves, the world around us, and one another, evolving our participation in prayer, prayer of union, communion, and flow. So let's begin with, let's see. It's not moving forward for me. There we go. Okay, so what is prayer? At its simplest, prayer is communication and communion with God. It's connecting and being with God, the we space between God and us, the divine meeting place. So of course, our understanding and experience of God will greatly inform what this looks like for each one of us, or even if we want to go to that meeting place. But for now, the primary question I want to hold is, when we consider prayer in an evolving sense, where is God? Where is God will greatly inform how it is we pray. So traditionally, prayer might look like talking to God with petition or intercession, offering requests to deities or an ancestor, liturgical acts to a higher power, offering blessings or prayers of thanksgiving and adoration to God, whatever form that might look like for various people. And these are fine ways and forms of praying. They often reflect a certain understanding and relationship to God that may not continue to fit for many of us as we evolve on our spiritual journey, or they just might not be enough. We might find ourselves longing for deeper expression in prayer. I know that I did as I grew in my spiritual practice. Richard Rohr has a good description of prayer that fits with this longing. He said, "I am increasingly convinced that the word prayer, which has become a functional and pious thing for believers to do, was meant to be a descriptor and an invitation to inner experience. When spiritual teachers invite you to pray, they are in effect saying, go inside and know for yourself. God is no longer out there, a distant deity needing to be reached, but rather God is right here, an internal experience that we can presence. This is mystical prayer, where God is able to be directly engaged with in this moment." So if this is the case, do we still need to pray? Can't we just meditate instead? As we come into interior knowing and experience, many move from talking to God in prayer to simply sitting in meditation, perhaps sitting with God or sitting with themselves. And meditation is wonderful. It's a crucial and important practice to developing our spiritual consciousness in many forms that it takes to widen our field of awareness. It's been vital and transforming in my own life. It's a crucial spiritual practice that's often been lacking in Christian tradition. But when it comes into its relation to prayer, there are a few limitations we may find if we just completely trade out prayer for meditation. First is that meditation is usually me and God alone. It's a solitary space. An old desert mystic said, "Go sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything." And I'm not sure that's the case anymore. It can teach us a lot, but it also reinforces an individualism that's baked into a lot of our spirituality these days, and also into prayer. I believe that prayer was always meant to be communal. Meditating alone by ourselves will not transform us into living from and deeply participating in the communion consciousness of divine nature, in the divine dance of the perichoresis, the communion of God happening in interplay and relationship. People might meditate together, but they're siloed off into their individual interior spaces more often than not. They're not really together in the internal space. So when we say, again, where is God? Is God only inside of me, in my own individual interior? Another bent away from prayer is a common spiritual disposition towards silence. St. John of the Cross said God's first language is silence. And Rumi says that silence is the language of God, all else is poor translation. Thomas Keating and others have adapted this quote, and many spiritual teachers talk about the importance of silence. And of course, it's very important. In the poem by Rumi, right before this line that's quoted here, he says, "Silence is an ocean, speech is a river." And I think we need rivers just as much as we need the ocean. The rivers are what bring life to the earth. They are the interpersonal engagement of water with life form, with humanity. All cities were built next to a river, and fresh water is essential for life. All water goes back to the ocean, but it's a necessary journey too. So too is prayer with speech and expression and spiritual practice. So, and one more way of thinking about this, if my wife is right here with me all the time, do I really need to talk to her? Well, of course, integrate do them both, right? Bring them together. So at its best, meditation brings us into a deeper, more integrated state of consciousness that allows us to encounter God more fully in our awareness, in identification, in perception, and open to mystery. We might call this mystical in the sense that it involves direct connection and participation with the divine in consciously present ways. And prayer opens us up in our consciousness to direct engagement with the divine. Again, whether we believe in a personal God or not. Teilhard de Chardin said of his evolving journey with his faith, stage by stage, my initial faith has taken a definitive shape. What was at first a vague intuition of a universal unity has become a rational and well-defined awareness of a presence. Since man, or humanity, is personal, a personal God must influence him at a personal level in a personal form. He must influence him intellectually and effectively. In other words, he must speak to him as one intellect to others. A presence cannot be dumb. So where is God? How do we engage, encounter, and communicate with God today? The divine meeting place usually changes throughout our lives as we grow and develop. We change, and so does our experience of God. And maybe we don't know how to pray as we evolve in prayer. Can we still meet God in the dynamic unfolding of our relationship with the divine? We may go through periods of demythologizing, deconstructing, and differentiating from past ideas of God. But hopefully we can continue on our journey without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Can we find ways that are more liberating to meet with the divine, which can include and reintegrate healthy gifts of traditional prayer? Like any evolution, we're not dismissing previous forms of prayer, but seeking to integrate the best of what has come before and widening the field of experience and mystical possibility. So integral prayer is a holistic and integrated approach to prayer, where we can learn to pray from a fuller, deeper consciousness with divine presence in a variety of forms and into the transcendent mystery, integrating meditation and deeper mystical consciousness in our prayer, in silence and in giving voice to our divine participation. And this means creating space for prayer through each of the three faces of God. If you're not familiar with the three faces of God, I'll go through each one of them with a little bit of description, but mostly focusing on how we pray as with from each of these faces. And that's what makes this prayer integral in a sense. It gives us the freedom to hold an understanding of God that encompasses the breadth of divine presence and manifestation. Engaging with each of these three faces in participatory experience is what we call integral prayer. And as we evolve in each of these three faces, we meet God in transcendence, relationship, and participation. So let's start with the infinite face of God beyond us, which is the objective, transpersonal, non-theistic, cosmic face of God, the I am of infinite being. As the Christian scriptures say, the one in whom we live, move, and have our being, where God is not a being, but being itself. God as infinite being and consciousness that holds all things, even infinity itself. So how do we pray this face of God? Here, our prayer can go from praying at a distant deity, the God in the sky, shooting rockets out, to praying into our experiential participation in the mystery, going beyond ourselves. We do this through moving into transcendence, through prayer and meditation. It is a prayer of union, praying into God beyond us in union. And this transcendence brings a sense of liberation that we need today so often. When we feel constriction or enclosure in our lives, we might even feel this contraction in our body, in our chest and gut. Praying into transcendence offers us a liberation and expansion that opens us up beyond these confines, takes us beyond our constricted self-sense and into the freedom and joy of the expanse of the mystery beyond ourselves. So sometimes transcendence gets a bad rap as an escapism or disassociation. While this can be true of less healthy forms, holistic transcendence into all of reality is actually a movement of greater connection, much greater presence, and much deeper being, We're not running away from ourselves and reality. We are praying into unified reality through a movement of holistic transcendence. Sri Aurobindo puts it in a provocative way. He says that transcendence transfigures, it does not reconcile, but rather transmutes opposites into something surpassing them that effaces their oppositions. I like that quote. It kind of twists my mind up a little bit. Praying in with the intimate face of God beside us. This is the intersubjective, personal, and theistic face of God that comes in many forms. The immanent presence of God, but not limited. Jesus magnificently modeled the intimate face of God through both his relationship to Abba Father, Mother, and also as a personal divine presence that is pure love for many Christians and others today. So we can find this presence in the living Jesus as Christianity's originating and defining figure, available to anyone at any time, and also far beyond with other forms of the divine in a personal sense, not just within Christianity's setting. So this personal form of God through subtle forms is another accessible way that we can experience God, right? Maybe we believe that. Is anybody really there? Personal prayer to God is one of the earliest and most traditional forms of prayer. We talk to God, we make requests, ask for blessings, right? But as we grow up, often these types of direct personal prayers get left behind. Do we still believe there is a God beside us? Or is that just an imaginary friend from a childlike naivete? Often the messages of modern materialism can cause us to doubt the reality of these non-physical presence and give up on this type of prayer entirely, moving to silent meditation or other forms that eschew the personal. But I believe that we can own our inner divine presence as well as the intimate presence beside us. We don't need to lose relational prayer with Jesus, Mary, saints, spirit guides, ancestors, and other forms. But how do we know that we are not alone, that someone is here with us? That is engaging in our subtle mystical consciousness. We have to move beyond the logical mind of Western rationalism that has demythologized some of our childish beliefs, may see them as magical. And as long as we're praying to someone, we'll likely begin to doubt the reality of their presence. Intimate prayer can really only come alive when the relational dynamic isn't just one-sided, but is a prayer with God. These personal presences of the divine, they have a lot to offer us as well. It's not just us speaking forth to them. Richard Rohr again says, I actually pray to God, to Jesus. I say prayers that come from the heart in a very I-thou personal give and take way of talking. Jesus brought the transpersonal God, the universal God, to an interface experience. I don't think I would begin to have whatever relationship I have with the divine if I did not have this combination of open-ended prayer and very personal prayer. Thomas Keating, father of centering prayer, said, I find talking with Jesus is a way to keep your mind in a recollect state all the time. As it gets deeper, you just do it automatically. So it's like a very advanced state of consciousness. You know where you are in solitude and constant contact with God at the super rational level, but you have to live in this world. You have to come back down. What are you going to do? You want to be able to move back and forth according to circumstances. We may be helpful to understand that we co-create with the mystery and the spiritual landscapes that emerge in the visionary realm. In other words, Jesus will look different to you as he does to others. The personal form of the divine will take many faces and shapes. The forms that we perceive in mystical awareness will always be filtered through our background, cultural understanding, and history, but that doesn't mean they're not real. It just means that our participation and perception is always part of the process. The observer is never separate from the experience, because you matter. Mystical reality is not independent of you. It's not a separate dimension that operates independent from our reality. It's intertwined and entangled with your life. This is the nature of love, and God is love, as I believe it. We participate in the form of the reality that is presenting itself. We have to choose to open to the non-physical reality arising in our senses, our minds, but also our hearts, our spiritual wombs or bellies, and all of our bodily senses. We will sense them uniquely, and they'll look differently to each one of us. And they have a separate ontological reality. These subtle figures are very real, and countless billions have connected with them down through the ages, including Jesus. We can discover relationship with spiritual presences that guide us and support us in very profound and powerful ways. And I think that's one of the babies we need not throw out with the bathwater as we evolve into our prayer of communion. So in integral prayer, we go from prayer to the God of our imagination to praying with God beside us, with personal spiritual presences, learning to listen and engage in relationship in both communication and the deep communion of simply being with a loving, caring presence. This is praying with God beside us in communion. And we may be surprised at who shows up there. And now the interface of God being us, the first person, subjective, mystical interface of God, which is called by such names as true self, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, enlightened self, or divine self. Owning our identification as a divine being, an expression of God ourselves, may still be a bit of a growing edge for some of us. We are often still in the process of going beyond our limited identities and accepting our deeper identity as a divine self. Do we believe it? Do you believe in God being you? The mystics throughout the ages have declared it. Catherine of Genoa says, "My deepest me is God," or Meister Eckhart says, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye that God sees me." Or Jesus saying, "I and the Father are one, that you may be one just as you and I are one." But this is not something we can just believe or come to believe with our minds. We need to experience it in deep ways. And in an integral prayer from the first person face of God, we can learn to pray from this incarnated divine consciousness. And we practice this in our WeSpace groups at ICN, and we do it in an embodied way, listening from our divine inner being, not just our constructed self, our forms of knowledge that we've gathered, but knowing from a divine state that is arising in, through, and as us, and then sharing that with one another. This is our participation in our divine identity. In 1 Peter 1:3-4, it says, "God's divine power has given us everything we need for life and for godliness. The power was given to us through knowledge of the one who called us by glory and goodness, by which we have been granted precious and magnificent promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature." Yes, it's there in Christian scriptures. So how would we actually participate in our divine nature? How would we experience this God being us? Again, it's co-creative. Jorge Ferrer describes it that transpersonal co-creation refers to dynamic interaction between embodied human beings and the mystery in the bringing forth of spiritual insights, practices, states, and worlds. We call this the prayer of flow. So in integral prayer, we can take seriously our identification as divine and then seek to pray from this immanent God being us, from our Christ consciousness, praying from God being us in flow. So integral prayer is praying into, with, and from each of the three faces of God, praying into the infinite face of God beyond us in union, praying with the intimate face of God beside us in communion, and praying from the interface of God being us in flow. That's the broad, general, encapsulating theory. And then the form that we practice it in our WeSpace groups and Integral Christian Network, and what we're going to do a little bit tonight, is what we call resonating prayer. Resonating prayer, which we'll try out here in a moment, is focused primarily on the inner and intimate prayer of flow and communion. So a little bit less of the infinite transcendent, and a specific way that we do that. So to resonate by definition is to affect or appeal in a personal or emotional way. So we're striking a chord with, in the relational space, a deeply personal and vibrating felt resonance within that seeks to strike a chord in another. to come into resonance with the divine in ourselves, in one another, and in all things. These pictures maybe convey better than I can try to describe what this feels like. So just absorb them for a moment here. Feel with your body what it's like to resonate in this way. So we have our inner resonance, coming into resonance with our own inner being, with the divine spirit consciousness that flows within and from us. In our ordinary consciousness, we're not usually as attuned to the deeper reality of our divine being within. We may not move, act, and speak in harmony with the loving core of our being, with the flow of God being us coming to manifest. So as we tune into our awakened consciousness, like we began to do in our opening practice, we come into an inner resonance with the flow of this awakened consciousness. Our whole body mystical awakening practices are designed to bring us into this state of inner resonance in an embodied way with our centers of spiritual knowing in the personal space within us. It doesn't always have to take a long meditation to get us there, especially the more that we practice it. We can move right into this resonating from our divine being in flow. In our intimate resonance, we come into resonance with others. This is attuning to the divine sound in one another and resonating at the same frequency, or maybe harmonizing to elevate our shared frequency. As we come more into inner resonance, we begin to recognize this interface of God is not just in us, but in others as well. Of course it is. And not just as a nice thought or way of looking at others, but as a consciousness from which we can share and pray with together. This is resonating with God being all of us in communion. Through our practice of resonating prayer, we often strike a chord with one another through something we share, and we know immediately that it resonates. It lands and moves us. We can feel it, and so can the other person. It's a reciprocal process. There is a giving and sending, but it's not an exchange. It's more of a mutual intensification that affects us both. Maybe not always equally, but usually harmoniously. This is in contrast to some older ideas of prayer where we get filled up and pour out to others. And so the more that we give out in resonance, the more the sound builds and reverberates. It's a very energizing practice. And then in infinite resonance, we can attune to the cosmos and all of reality. This is resonating into the union with all, where we can feel it through transcendence in many forms. A deeper reality of wholeness and ultimate being that is present in a way that resounds underneath it all, like the galactic gravitational waves permeating throughout the entire cosmos, undetectable amidst the general noise and activity within our celestial sphere of the earth. Metaphor and poetry is about as best as we can get to describe that form of infinite resonance. So I think I'll stop there. There's a little bit more I could go into about how this prayer is actually rooted in Christian scriptures and historical as well as evolving, but I think we're going to stop there and move a little bit into our practice together of this. And before we do that, I'll just share a little bit about how we're going to do this. So I'm going to ask for a couple volunteers to be those that we focus on and in a sense pray for. And so I think about that if that's something you might be willing to do. But what we'll do is we'll move back into the meditative state. And as we focus on one person, what we do first is everyone just what we call engages in the flow and sends heart energy and love to that person. And that person just sits back and receives. So that's the first thing that we do silently. And that in and of itself is a pretty powerful experience. You can often feel the energy of that pretty palpably. And that's a form of energetic and spiritual transmission as well. Then as we do that, we can also open up to that inner divine consciousness and ways of knowing that might come forth in forms of images or pictures or words or something that we want to share with that person, to give voice to an impression or something that is coming up that we want to share with them. And then we can tell them that. We can say what it is. And that can look a lot of different ways. We say the things that we share are always for the purpose of strengthening, comforting, and encouraging, which is from 1 Corinthians. It is invitational rather than directional. So it's not a psychic knowing or a telling someone what to do. There's no shoulds or need to. There's no advice giving or correcting or things like that. It's just a way to be with what is emerging in that spirit consciousness and offer that to one another. So that might look like from your head center images or pictures or words that just come forth. You might just feel that as a warmth in your heart, a burning or a sensation that you can just sit with or name. Sometimes deep intuitions arise from our gut or our spiritual womb, a sense of knowing maybe just one word or something that we can't quite explain that we just need to share with the person. And then through our feet or our whole body, sometimes we get a somatic resonance with the other person. I often feel this. I'll have some energy in a part of my body that will reflect something that I'll share with the person. So those are some ways that our mystical languages of our awakened consciousness might manifest in this form of resonating prayer. And everyone is different. So we can go with, however that looks for us. And we'll just take the time to probably focus on, I don't know, 3 or 4 people maybe, just so we can get a taste of it. And then after that, we'll move into some breakout groups and process that experience and what that felt like. So just encourage you to trust your experience, to be open to experimenting with this, and take everything lightly. Nothing has the authority of the voice of God, right? And that's not the type of prayer we're doing. It's just offering what we sense for one another. So do I have some volunteers who might be willing to receive this? Yes, Susie. Okay. Anyone else? Griselda? Okay. Anyone else? Other hand, Elson. Okay. Maybe one more. Anyone else?
I want to be with Sandy.
Sandy. Okay. Wonderful, Sandy. Okay. So, great. So just let's, before we move into focusing on any one person, let's just come back for a moment into our embodied being, into our consciousness that we started with our meditation, to feel present in our body, in the flow of awakened consciousness. Again, this is not a movement that comes from just our egoic knowing, but we are welcoming and calling forth our awakened knowing and participation in that divine flow with one another. So just welcome again your heart, and in your heart presence, open up to yourself, open up to this we space here with one another, recognizing that we are sharing an energy field and presence with one another. Welcome again your grounded presence in your feet, your somatic knowing. Welcome your deep belly, your hara, your spiritual womb, the creativity and intuitions that come through this source. And welcome your open mind present in your whole body. And we'll begin by focusing first on Susie. You can find her with her hand up. And we'll just start by first silently engaging in the flow. So if you feel so drawn and you would like, you can just open your heart to Susie. You may know her, you may not. That doesn't matter. We can send love to anyone. So just let your heart send energy to Susie. Let yourself flow in that compassionate giving. And then as we're doing that, we can also open to sensing anything that might be arising in us as we focus on her. Again, perhaps an image or a word or a bodily sensation or anything that might come forth. And if something arises for you that you'd like to share with Susie, you're welcome to unmute and offer that to her now.
The image that arose in me was offering a bouquet of flowers to Susie.
Just warmth.
Yeah, I feel that too. I feel a real warmth in my heart, Susie, as I focus on you. And I'm also feeling a lot of energy in my back, in the middle part of my back. And it's kind of like a not a propping up, but a holding up energy, a strength of support and upholding. And that's what I'm sensing for you.
I feel abundant lushness of summer.
I
Hi,
have a
Susie.
sense-
Hey, Susie. I had a feeling of like a sensation of just like a deep welling up and some tears just kind of coming up for me. I did hold it back, but that's what I felt.
I have a sense of deep relaxation in my snout area, if you will, and sort of a tingling sensation. Warmth.
I'm feeling like a comfort of just sitting with each other here.
I have an image, Susie, of your heart, and it's a little unique. It's like a master receptive heart, so that you're drawing in all of the love, and it's like as a gift to us all. And then I see that emanating out, not with light, more with invisible presence. So like this transmission system of absorbing all of our love with great willingness, and then through presence without image, uplifting in return.
Thank you, everyone, for all that you've offered for Susie. Let's turn and focus next on Griselda. We'll put Griselda into the center of our focus and attention now. And first, again, begin by sending silently that energy of transmission and love. And then as things arise, feel free to share.
Feeling the vulnerability and strength.
Courage.
Flowers and garlands all over you.
That's what I was feeling. I got a lot of energy on the top of my head, and it's like a laurel crown around the top and back, but it's flowers, but it's also a sense of like stars. So there's also almost like a cosmic quality to it as well. Very regal.
I got inner
Say again.
I got inner strength.
Mhm.
I got childlike curiosity stepping in.
I had like a dome, like almost, I had my eyes closed. I sort of like a dome, like the top of a temple, but then maybe it was a crown, like Luke was saying.
I had a sensation of swelling in my belly. I've never been pregnant, but feels like what pregnancy might feel like something new is arising and emerging from deep within.
I'll go with that. I really see, feel like almost the garland that was, but it's like you're birthing it and it's emanating down and into embodied reality in the earth.
I had a sensation of just like my abdomen, my core, just like not tight as in restricting, but like strong. I think somebody said, mentioned vulnerability and strength. That's what I was feeling.
Thank you, everyone, for all that you've shared for Griselda. Now let's turn to Elson as we focus there and again, first engage in the flow silently and then offer what is arising.
A childlike openness and receptivity.
She's standing in the middle of rushing water, in the middle of rivers. She's standing solidly as the water rushes around her.
That's related. I right as I started focusing on you, Elson, my feet started moving and kind of like in a skating motion, like ice skating. But it felt like the water wasn't fully frozen. So there's like a struggle there, but there's also this gliding and ease at the same time.
Feeling something very timeless and ethereal, just flowing.
Feeling blossoming joy.
Sweetness, greenery, like a jungle goddess.
I feel as though I'm swaying with you, dancing with you.
I came up with the image of a blanket. I just wanted to wrap a blanket around you. But I also have the sense that the world is calling. The world needs something from you. And it's time for you to figure out a way to give it.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for all that you've shared and offered to Elson. And I also always like to affirm that what we share in words is only a piece of what we're sharing and offering to one another, because there's also a lot that's being sent and shared that's silent and beyond words. So we honor and welcome that as well. And next, let's focus on Sandy.
there's a deep knowingness about your, I don't know. It's a knowingness that I'm feeling when I'm seeing you.
Yeah, I got something like that, like a maturity of wisdom.
You are a queen. I'm not sure what kingdom you're the queen of, but you are regal somewhere.
Yeah, I got that too, a regal nature kind of, yeah.
Sandy, as I focus on you, I feel a lot of energy in the lower part of my back, and it's kind of like anchoring me down into the chair, and my limbs kind of want to go flying out. Like there's this sense of wanting to eject, but there's like, yeah, this strong grounding that's holding in place, and that energy feels perhaps maybe a little conflicted to me, but it also feels good and important and necessary right now.
Yeah, I'm experiencing, Sandy, something similar. Like I'm almost seeing this big, almost like grandfather clock weight come from your root chakra down towards the ground, and almost a sense it can feel heavy, but it's also deeply connecting you and all to the wisdom of the earth. So the heaviness keeps you connected to creation and its wisdom and its holiness.
I'm feeling the burden of insight, which can be heavy, but there's strength with which to deal with all of that.
Feeling fire in you. Fire coming from your heart. Such strong fire from you.
Sensing the image of like a circle, a lot of depth, like almost like an ocean-like quality to it, and things feel very contained, a lot of containment.
I want to send you strength. And it occurs to me as I think about strength, I've got this tree right in front of me. You can see how big it is. Just keeps going up and up and up. And it's just solidly rooted.
I'm feeling the energy when you hug a tree. I can't describe it, but I know everybody here has hugged trees, and you know what I'm talking about. It's just awesome.
Thank you all so much for participating in this practice. And I want to especially thank the four of you who, for your vulnerability, for your willingness to step into the center and receive. That's, so appreciated. And as with this practice, anything that's offered or shared to us is free to accept if it resonates, if it fits, and if it doesn't have that resonance, we just release it and let it go. And that's part of the practice, recognizing that maybe not everything will land, but we can offer some feedback in that at times. I think we'll hold off on that. Maybe we can share some of that a little bit later, but sometimes when something lands especially strong, just sharing that and saying, oh yeah, that that really resonated, that helps the person who shares it know that they were in flow, right? And they were tuning in as well. So the more that we do this practice together, the more there is kind of also a collective flow, and the images and symbols and forms that take shape in the we space often interact and engage with one another. So we've just had a little bit of a taste of this practice, one form of this resonating prayer that we share in together. And thank you so much all for participating in this. And in whatever way you did, we're going to move into some breakout groups now with some questions to process a little bit more this experience. You can share your own experience, maybe if you had resistance or things that came up for you that you didn't share, or just really get into some of the inner processes that we were experiencing in the midst of this practice here now. And then later on, we'll have another breakout group that's more kind of about the general topic and what I talked about earlier. So for this first round of breakout groups, let's try to focus more on our experience that we just shared together, using the jumping off questions that Kathy put in the chat. What was your experience during this resonating prayer practice? And did you feel any resistance or difficulties, any strong impressions or sensations for someone? Maybe how that was for you. Was it somatic, visual, otherwise? So I think we'll be in these breakout groups for 15 minutes, sharing about our experience.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
So as we come back together here, I'll open up this space. We'll have about 10 minutes here together, and before we move into the next breakout group round. And so in this space, I just want us to have the opportunity to presence maybe something that stood out to you or impacted you from your group sharing that someone else said. So not something you said, but something you heard maybe that struck you that you'd want to reflect back to the main group. And then the other thing we could also presence is if there were any questions that came up around this practice, we can kind of name some of those now. We won't maybe answer them quite yet, but let's start with what stood out or impacted you from something someone else in your group shared. Yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
My only real impression during that period was when Sandy was up, and I had an image of water, and then found out when she was sharing with us in the room, I hadn't said anything yet, but then she shared with us that the water is a big thing in her life, and I thought that was real interesting, and thought that was just kind of validating, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that feedback process is really important in validating and helping. Yeah, so I'm glad you ended up in the same group, got to do that. What else? You don't have to raise your hand. You can just unmute, start talking.
In my group, there was, I like the way people in talking about what they were feeling used words that said, oh yeah, they got that. There was one person that they felt like heartbreak around, and saying, oh, that's it, or whatever. We saw different aspects, that there's not like one note in anybody, but then hearing the other people in our group share what they sensed, would say, yeah, that was there too.
What I shared in our group was like, I've known Sandy for years, and how she's always raised the group to a level of let's get real and embodied in the moment, because she feels things so deeply, Elson too. And I was asking the question, why is that the entry portal from resonance that kind of invites all of us to participate more? It's, to me, from outside, it's a deep level of hunger that creates resonance in all of us to be seen and loved, in that moment that deeply that we piggyback on it and we carry that energy. But why that entry point all the time? It's almost like a hunger entry point. Whereas the resonance is always here. You know, we can always tap it. But I do appreciate it. I know I relied upon Sandy through the years many times to move the group along. Thank you, Sandy.
In my group, I had the other Sandy along with Stephen. And then at the very end, she had us all be really silent just with the three of us. And we put our hands up like that. And we felt this like tingling almost like, and I said, I wanted to hug you all. It's like, it was really kind of cool. So thank you, Sandy.
Jesse, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Sandy, I'm just bumping off of you. One of the things I loved in our group was the intimacy. It was quite the same as doing that. It was just lovely intimacy that had a beautiful hum.
Yes, we had something similar in our group of three. For the last 3-4 minutes, we just went around and shared our own spiritual or contemplative practice, what we were used to. And Carol, who was in our group, expressed at the end that gave her the feeling of the greatest energy and joy. I'm kind of reporting from my memory, not what she said, but that we had an experience like that hum at the end of our session, breakout session also.
I'd like to invite Shara to say some of what she said, because I don't think I could do it justice, but and I think she'd probably remember it better than I did.
Well, I can speak to kind of what came from our collective. You know, kind of this inquiry of what this field is. And Eloy was talking about like the very first people who spoke for the first person, like they were risks. And he was saying it was like a drop that then activated this field that then becomes a conscious interdependent field. And there's something emerging about interdependence, that we're dependent on it. So there's knowing and wisdom that comes from this interdependent field, but I can only do it with you. We can only do it with each other. And like a dependency, when it goes away, it's gone. So where we're like a dependency can be negative, and we can think, oh, we need more of the drug. But this brings back the need for more of collective shared humanity. And that's activating a yearning for a we-ness that has wisdom that doesn't exist anywhere else, but we need each other for it. And we created it today through especially those first people who dared to speak a few words with that leadership, where we don't know what we're doing, but you trusted it and did it anyway. And that like allowed all of us to activate the aliveness of us.
Our group questioned the container. We were talking about, like, what about the grocery store? So I guess there was a lot of questioning about the mutuality versus, you know, how often, if we just express our love wherever we are, how much does it influence things? Or maybe we'll have to experiment.
Yeah, definitely. Someone said it like we're always in the field. I can't remember if that was in the main group or in my breakout group, but yeah, we use that language too, right? And there is a boundary that we can set, and that might be temporary, that might be permeable, that might be atemporal. And yeah, there's ways that we can participate in that flow in non-boundaried settings. It's definitely ways to experiment with that for sure.
I have a question about the process in the big group process. Is when you are doing this in your practices, do you have more time of silent field creation, or do you seem like we went very quickly into sort of being a field and then talking? Is that typical, or is there a different sort of, because you were limited by our time frame here? You get what I'm asking, I can tell.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, usually it is a little more spacious. Actually, what in our group practices in the we space, what we'll usually do is we'll have more like a 20-minute whole body mystical awakening meditation to really move into that presence and consciousness together more actively. And that's a we space practice. So we did it individually, primarily, some opening up to the field, but that practice leads us more into the field. And then when we go around and focus on each person, there's often kind of an extended silence to begin before people start speaking. Yeah. So yeah, now it's time for our next round of groups, and the questions for this time will be a little more maybe kind of zooming out, stepping back from the immediacy of this experience, although of course you're welcome to keep sharing and talking about that if you like. But this is more about the presentation, the talk. Do you pray? What does that look like in your life? Does integral prayer appeal to you? Is there one of the faces of God that you feel more drawn to pray into, with, or from? And what intrigues you most today? What are you interested in exploring more? So those are, again, jumping off questions, ways that you can just let the flow of conversation move off of these questions, and we'll be in these groups for 20 minutes. So here we go, if we're ready.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Okay, well, yeah, welcome back again together. And this is our closing space. I know there's also like kind of a social time afterwards for further conversation for those who want to stick around longer, I believe, right? But yeah, in this period, these last few minutes before the top of the hour, we can just, share any reflections or key takeaways, or I like to end a lot of our groups by saying this is our absorption time. So sometimes we just absorb that silently or energetically, or sometimes we feel like we want to speak or present something that's come forth that struck us, or anything we want to share as we wrap up the time together.
Well, I'll go with deep gratitude.
Okay.
These conversations have been phenomenal. So it's amazing. I wish I had recordings of everything everybody said, because it's so hard to take it all in, but it was great. Thank you.
By the end, we actually started doing something that we do in my groups, is we got more interchangeable. And I said something and Mary said, "That's this." And it's like, I love it when we get interchangeable. I just love it, because she said what I meant, but I didn't know I meant it. But I like it when we get like that.
Right.
It was like, yeah, oh, yeah, oh. Like, I like it when we get interchangeable.
Well, I have to share, I am Jewish, and there was an incredible situation with Phyllis in our group. There's a Yiddish word, I know like 3, and the Yiddish word is bashert, which is meant to be. And this tonight was meant to be. Phyllis and I discovered we're both Jewish. She lives in New York, I live in New Jersey. We both came back to our root faiths on the death of our husbands and fathers, and we're going to be best friends.
Yeah.
As they say sometimes, from your mouth to God's ears.
Eloy, I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit about why or how or what went into your comment about the conversations were phenomenal. What made it phenomenal for you?
It was a weaving together, like each person would speak for a bit, and then it would bring out something in the others in the room, and we were just like building on top of each other, and it's just a lot of energy and love, and there was depth in the words. We were in a flow. We were just in the flow in the conversation. So
yes, indeed. Thank you.
Yes, I thought we were in the flow in our group too. I was in the group with Jesse, and it was just a very lively popcorn popping energy at the end. We were about just really very playfully interacting with each other, and just I left on a note of elation with something that Jessie had come up with about she had an insight about herself she hadn't thought. You can correct me, Jessie, if I get this wrong, but she hadn't really thought of herself as praying. But when she's working with her worms in her dirt farm, and she knows when they're happy and she knows when they're sad, it's an energy, it's an attunement, and it's like it's prayer. And she said, and so I just realized you don't have to just pray up, you can pray down. And so we can pray up, down, out, we can pray in all directions. And so we were just high together. There was definitely, it was a very joyful, energetic flow in our group.
The Ken Wilber's book, The Religions of Tomorrow, came up in our group, our breakout group. And it's interesting, my own experience of all my allergic reactions to prayer coming from my Catholic tradition. And how much qualitatively, when we directly addressed what is the divinity, what is the divine, that qualitatively what we experience was improved. It was a higher order of things. And I asked myself, why did this succeed? And when we dropped the dogma and the stuff that wants that tribal membership, then the only requirement of participation is to feel love. And because we all hunger for that, and we resonate in the moment when we're swimming in it, it's very easy. And then these words, and the religions of tomorrow, what Wilber said is traditional religions fail to provide the conveyor belt so that people find these higher states, because they get lost in the dogma, they get lost in traditions. And Shara was sharing, what would the founders of Unity Church read today? How would they stay current to articulate what wants to emerge? So congratulations. I think it resolves some of my shadows today. I appreciate it immensely.
Oh, me too. I was not looking forward to this. I thought, why are we doing something on prayer? And then now I'm stoked. I'm going to check out this stuff.
Excuse me. I should just say a few closing words because we're about, so we can stay on time, and then we can continue to the discussion right at 6 o'clock. But thank you so much for joining us and being brave and exploring what's new territory for a lot of us and speaking up and sharing. And thank you to Luke for putting together. I'm in awe about the art that you put together in this slideshow. And I think I've got your, I encourage anybody, Luke just shared, and I just shared the website to find out more about Luke. So, and then just a quick reminder to everybody to visit the website, sandiegointegral.org, for next month. We will be posting soon next month's event on August 12th with, where'd I put it, Jeff Fitch from Pacific Integral. And please RSVP on Meetup so we know how many people to expect. And you can make a donation to cover our expenses there as much. So we're going to move into our informal chat segment right now. So thank you who have to sign off just and be watchful of their time. So we'll hope to see you next month. And we can start with some questions. So this ends our formal presentation, period.
Thank you all so much. Wonderful to share together. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank everybody too for just what they gave to me. I mean, I was ready for it, and it was like I absorbed it all, and it was really beautiful. For me, I was really moved, and I felt that I felt like my heart was expanding. You know, everything about me was expanding, so it was great. Thank you.
That's great, Sandy, because we were curious about how this landed for the people that were in focus.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been called a queen before. I mean, things like that. That's when I started crying. It's like, oh, they got me. They got me. So yeah, and the water and things like anything with water fits for me, but everything did. Just it felt like they acknowledged my maturity, my growth, my strength. And I'm going off to take care of. As soon as my daughter tells me she's in labor, she's 8 days late. I'm going to be going to LA, and I'm going to have to need all the strength I can because she's a challenging child. And I'm taking care of 3 kids for her, so it'll be tough. So I'm looking forward to it, but it's you know, it's kind of like waiting. But yeah, that's why I asked to do it, because I knew I would need that. And the nice thing about you guys said, I wrote down everything. I don't know what you meant, Luke, when you said my lower back, my limbs were flying. I don't know what that meant, but everybody else was like, it just really fit with me. So what did you mean by that?
I don't know. It's up for interpretation, but just the felt sense was like this strong energy in my back, like holding, like anchoring, and then kind of like, yeah, the limbs wanted to like get up out of the chair and, you know, run off and go do something. So that, if that clarifies a little, but
yep, it does.
Like I said, if it fits, great, you know, take it in. If not, release it. Sometimes these are just, you know, what I had for dinner that was weird, or, you know, projection. That's what we didn't talk about. There's a lot in the practice, right? There's ways that we can project, or, you know, other things that it's not always resonating or in tune. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was noticing, Luke, during that exercise when we were focused on each of the people, that there were like different levels of things that I could access to respond to. And the first one was like what's going on in my body, what's, you know, the felt sense thing, like you mentioned. And then the next is like, what's in the field between us. And then the third one, which didn't happen much, or I didn't know how to put into words, was, and I'm going to say it was, you know, touching the divine and wanting to, but then I couldn't bring words back. But I noticed that with each of the people, I had this sense of, I'm just here with you. I'm, you know.
I was really impressed. I mean, I don't I didn't get so deeply into this as some people did, but I was kind of like more watching and aware of the field, although not quite in it. But what impressed me so much was what people came up with seemed to, well, it was like, it was intuitive. It was really reading the subtle energy and saying things that just hit the person in the focus where they were at very deep levels. I mean, there's no way we could know these things rationally. And yet what people were coming up with spoke to something very deep in each of those persons. And you could see by their reactions. And had Sandy and Elson and a couple of my breakout groups, we got to hear that just what in their lives that responded to. And what I have been really moved by is the sense, well, in my own personal cosmology, I have a very clear distinction between my ego self, the construct, you know, the stages, and the divine self, the God is the I, the first person. And in my ego self, I know I'm not the divine self, but there's a flow between them. And the divine self doesn't need this affirmation, but the individual self does. And how deeply affirmed how much we need this. I mean, just to hold a child, a baby, and really look at it and really see it, to see each other and just be present for each other as individuals, as ego selves, to be seen and held with pure, unjudging, loving attention. I think that's something that each of us deeply needs and deeply craves. And I've heard expressed several times through these 2 hours we spent together, how deeply we each need and crave that kind of attention. So,
Karen, I'm just gonna jump in real quick. Hey everybody. I'm about to bomb this hill, so I have to turn off my video, but I'm listening in and just wanted to reflect back and give some feedback. And I did in the group, but just in the bigger group, everything that was said. Wow, I've never had this experience before, and every single thing landed in such a way, it hit me really hard. Thank you so much. I love you all.
I have a comment and a question. It was interesting what Tim was saying about, sort of the sense of the dropping the dogma and religions, because one of the issues for me is the word Christian. And it is really interesting. Here this is, it's like Christian Integral. So that's an interesting comment, because there's still this using that word that has so much embedded in and projected and embodied in it. So that's an interesting issue for me personally. But certainly the practices, and then what is interesting about that is how your practices are resonating with sort of original Christian, like the original real Christian, which is so, not very embedded very often. So that is really interesting, but then there's terminology questions. One other question I have is in what you do out in your practice. It's just like you have weekly meetings, you do hour-long prayer practices, you do a little bit of a talk. I'm curious how that all plays out in your practice of this out beyond this structure. Luke.
Yeah, so I guess I'll hit that second one first. I think I know what you're asking in terms of like this is a central practice of our We Space groups, which meet twice a month. And that's something people can join, and there's an initiation period, a teaching and unfolding of this. So we actually have 3 group times where we unfold elements of this. So I kind of threw it all at you right at the right at the get-go. But yeah, and then when the groups come together, they'll share in a meditation practice in this form of resonating prayer, and evolves from there in different forms. So that's kind of the general rhythm of it. But then, yeah, there are ways that each group kind of integrates that and takes that into their life settings in different spaces. We also have like a weekly Sunday gathering where we don't do this resonating prayer exactly, but we'll do a communion meditation and some other things. And yeah, we also have like a Thursday co-exploration discussion group. So those are just some of the rhythms our community has, but that we enact this collectively. And then I don't know if that answers exactly what you're asking, but.
And I am curious about your personal background, like the pathways that led you to here. That would be really interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up as an evangelical Christian. I went to Christian school, church all the time, and it was very fundamentalist and really embedded in a very red, blue Christianity, and was indoctrinated heavily into that. And but was always drawn to the experiential from early childhood trauma, had a connection to God's love not being separated from me, even though familial love was, and that just kind of provided an anchor point of experience. I felt that deep in my little child body, and that carried me through to like read the mystics and look at the footnotes and find others, and that sort of cracked open the walls of indoctrination. And when I found Integral and that map of the evolving journey, that just everything clicked, because that's what I had experienced. That's, you know, I went through deconstruction and a dark night period, and, you know, a whole interior spiritual journey that I didn't really have support for or understanding of beyond what I was reading. So it was a long process to find a way into that evolving expression that I longed for, and also into a community of that. So I met Paul Smith a number of years ago, and we just instantly connected and resonated, and we're like met together for over a year, and was like, hey, what if we did something with this? And gathered, because he got all these emails from Christians around the world saying, you know, are there churches like this? Where does this? And that ties into why we've kept the word Christian. That has come up a bunch, because it is a real loaded term, and it's something that is associated with a certain stage and form of Christianity, especially nowadays in Western culture. And so that's something that we're constantly having to claim and point beyond, right, to evolve. So rarely do we use the term Christian without integral attached to it, or mystical, or something else, right, to try to signify that what we're doing here is something different. It is in some sense both a truer expression of original Christianity. You referenced that, Sandy. I didn't get to talk about that in my talk. There is a whole section on how this practice is actually really similar to some of the things the early church did, and with awakened spirit consciousness. So we're really wanting to redeem that word and to evolve it into a further expression, as hopefully good integralists, right, in that sense that we're growing beyond the limiting and trapping expressions of that are toxic and abusive, and we're not going to let them be the sole proprietors of the term Christian. So it's a challenge, though. I mean, people are definitely turned off by it, and you know, experience something different to change what that felt sense can feel like. But a lot of shadow and baggage attached to that for many people, including myself, often at times. So yeah.
Thank you. You don't have to answer this now, but I am really curious about what that process looks like in terms of that, you know, like redemption of original Christianity. That's really fascinating to me, but you don't have to go into that now, but that is interesting.
Yeah, Marjorie, everybody just jump right in. We're in an informal part.
Oh,
you don't have
okay.
to raise
Yeah,
your
sorry
hand.
about that.
No problem.
Yeah. So I apologize for the there's background noise here, and I wasn't able to participate in the breakout groups because I haven't been feeling well tonight, but I have been listening. And what I want to kind of presence for myself, at least, is that, and I'm not sure exactly what Ken Wilber said in regards to the traditional levels of development in terms of religion, but I'm pretty sure that he would have found the partial truth in it. And I know for myself that there are many Christians that I know who are from the traditional aspect of it, who are find a trueness for themselves. They're not indoctrinated. They are there by choice. And I mean, I know for myself that I love some of the traditional aspects of Christianity. Particularly for me, it's the music that comes out of some of those traditions, like the Gregorian chant, for example. I can really get myself into a mystical state just from listening to that, you know. And even though the words are repetitive, and you know, there's just such deepness there. So I'm also hearing for myself, anyway, I'm hearing a distinction or a separation between good Christianity and bad Christianity. You know, that kind of and that doesn't feel integral to me. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that, but I was feeling it, and I just felt like I wanted to presence that into the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking about Gregorian chants, and how they probably experience that as a collective state and experience. So it's interesting you mention that, Marjorie.
Yes, this is, I'll try to be brief and lucid here because this is one of my big issues. I've been reading Sex Ecology and Spirituality with Nomali Pereira. I know a couple of other people here are also in that group, and we're nearly done with the footnotes. And one of the issues I have been kind of arm wrestling Nomali about is a few tweaks I would make to the Aquil system as Ken Wilber presents it. I think it's terrific. It's the greatest synthesis ever. There are a few places where, as a cultural historian, I would tweak it a bit. And Ken Wilber's treatment of Christianity in the second half of Sex Ecology Spirituality, I don't think he's fair to it. And he based a lot of what he knew on Gebser. And Gebser completely ignored the Middle Ages. He completely skipped over it. It's a separate phase. There is such beautiful spirituality in traditional Christianity. Yes, it is solid orange, amber, you know, and I mean, what amber blue, if you, depending on if you do spiral dynamics, solid amber. That is phase appropriate. Every one of the world's great axial age traditions went through that phase, and they have some form of the dogmatic because that level corresponds. In Ken Wilber's Up from Eden, where in his genius, he aligned Gebser with Piaget's cognitive development in individuals. This is concrete operational thinking. This is the first turn into using the intellect. It is very literal. It's concrete operational. Of course, you do dogma at that level. Every one of the world's great wisdom traditions exists in all the stages. They have versions in all the stages. Some are healthy, some are unhealthy. And we certainly, those of us who come through the Christian background, the Western background, we certainly know about the witch hunts and the Inquisitions and so on. But the beauty, the beauty of the spirituality. And that was what I was in love with when I was in academia studying Western Middle Ages. The cathedrals, the light coming from heaven, illuminating this lower world. And yes, Gregorian chant, that was a communal energy. I mean, you sit there for an hour and you're chanting Gregorian chant. This is a very serious spiritual practice. And one of the things I love about Integral is that we can, from this point of view, we can retrieve the glories and the beauties of the spirituality and the practice of Western Christianity. I mean, it is glorious, and I'm so glad, Luke, and people like you that you are resurrecting is the wrong word, but you are carrying forward the glories of the spirituality in our Western tradition.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And that's so important. I mean, it's Christianity in Western culture in the US and otherwise is in a bit of a crisis point right now, I think. And there's so much baggage and negative stuff attached to it that the need for differentiation is really strong. You know, I mentioned my growing up in evangelical culture, and there's a huge movement of deconstruction and coming out of and recognizing, disentangling from that dogma, from the ways that it's been entrenched in politics and empire, and there's so much there that it can get really lost in that deconstruction. It can get lost in that differentiation, and they don't know that there's such a there are things emerging there, but that's where the space we really wanted to be in was to offer, okay, how do we then reintegrate into the next form, into next stages? And so there is a bit of messiness with that, some things will be triggers for others. We see this all the time, like in our Sunday gatherings, the music that we choose, some people, you play the chant and they're like brought back to their experience living in a monastery, and just like, oh, it's like it's horrible for them, and others are like, oh, that's so beautiful and expressive, and so music's a great example there, where for some people it's a trigger, some people it's something that is to be reintegrated from the past. So there's a bit of individualism in that, of course, but we all bring that experience to it. So that process of navigating what is good and what is bad from the past, it's not like black and white, and it's a process for everyone. And how do we do that communally? How do we make space for that discernment in those acts of differentiation, and then also what reintegration looks like personally and communally. And I very much think that is rooted in the experiential and the mystical. That's the main thing, is where like, oh yeah, you know, people at every stage can kind of connect to that, even though they'll interpret it differently, right? But there's that element of, you know, yeah, let's move it back to the mystical, to the primary human experience, the incarnated, embodied, right, presencing of love. There's some right rooting back, and we're also trying to re-welcome some of those magic structure of consciousness elements right into the field, and reintegrate in that way as well. And there's a real hunger for that also.
Yeah.
So it's a complex process that people experience differently, and it's definitely a challenge to make space for the various ways that lots of people are looking to do that.
Spoken as a true integralist, I love it.
Yeah, I was going to say Luke, it's a beautiful articulation, handling the complexity and the convolutedness and the ambiguity, and how that all can get conflated down into dogmas. Yeah, I'm going to check out your group. I'm inspired by how you're articulating all this. Very nice.
Thanks.
I'm going to check it out too. And Marjorie, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was in a spiritual cult for a while, and I noticed what people do is the people that admit it was a cult and the people that thought it was the best thing in their life. And it makes these two camps. And of course, there was all kinds of amazing things I got out of being in a cult, as well as terrible things. And it's because whenever you're in that tribal mentality or you're in that thing, it's going to be both, because individuality goes out the door. And I like that. I like us looking at that, you know. And when I'm teaching about trauma and abuse, I always ask people, you know, what did you learn from it? What did you get from it? Like, it's this really amazing parts of being traumatized and abused that, you know, sometimes I feel sorry for people that grow up in a little greenhouse that didn't get, you know, miserable situations happen to them, because you get all kinds of resilience, all kinds of stuff you get from being kicked in the face. So I love that, Marjorie. Thank you. You know, that makes it not a polarity, you know.
It's really fascinating to me, just in terms of the whole concept of the redemption piece. One of the things I do, I work with Thomas Hubel, who does work with healing collective trauma and uses actually very similar processes that you do. And as being a member of a group with the word Christian, to me means danger. I have a really immediate response to that word, is danger. I could see potentially, you know, because of the dynamics of the field work you're doing, that one of the, you know, what Thomas Hubel does is heal collective trauma by gathering and people who are sort of resonating with the same trauma and doing collective work with that as a field that has a really powerful and dramatic impact. So in terms of that pathway about the redemption piece, the skill sets that are being developed, really does feel like there's this place of application, and it works on multiple levels, because healing any kind of trauma on any collective is a really good thing. But I welcome that as well, because it is like, as I'm doing this, I have to keep like, oh yeah, there it is. It's like danger. The word is danger. The word means danger and nothing else. So I'm curious to just observe how this plays out. I find it really fascinating, and you definitely feel primed and able. So I'm really glad that you're doing this work. Thanks.
And the third word in our name is network, which is like, you know, the part of our vision is to create a network community where that sort of particular aspects and applications of the work can arise from within our community. And so we really try to, you know, we're still early, we're almost 5 years old now, but we're hoping to create that network environment where that sort of work can be supported and collaborated with others amidst the network. So Connie's doing a bit of that. I don't know if you want to speak to anything in response to that around collective trauma and whatnot.
I'm just really grateful to be a part of this conversation tonight. I think there is a hunger, and Hubel is doing, I think, a great service in the collective, but there are these other smaller pods that don't have the breadth, and I think are creating slightly more intimate places to have these conversations. And the work that Luke is doing and the gatherings that we're involved in creating, I think are a great gift for people to be able to come into a safe space and have the conversations that matter. So, yeah, thank you all.
Yeah. So that brings up a question I was going to ask anyway, is what are the adjacent communities or the compatible communities? Like I always thought of like Christian contemplatives as being having more in common like with Buddhist monks than with traditional clergy, for example. And I could see that your movement could certainly enfold or include the Christian contemplatives and Christian mystics. And I asked the question in one of our breakouts, is like, does any of this include like nature mysticism or, you know, other kinds of,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, integrating various forms of mysticism. That there's some of that in the practice we do of the four centers, the feet, the nature mysticism, and formless. It can get pretty expansive, but the contemplative, I come out of that as well. I went as a graduate of the Living School at the Center for Action and Contemplation with Richard Rohr and Cynthia Bourgeot and James Finley. And so one of the things that Paul Smith and I talked about from the start was how do we reintegrate some of the experiences that we'd had with a more of a relational mysticism, with charismatic experience in the past that we both had some experience with, healthy and unhealthy. But right, how do we welcome the subtle and the causal, right? How do we bring together experiences? Because that was my experience in the contemplative arena, was a real leaving behind of the personal, of the subtle. And there's can be some of that in some forms of integral too, right? With this sort of ascending hierarchy into the non-dual, and depends on how people apply it or whatever, right? But that was a fundamental inquiry and desire to have spaces where we could integrate the contemplative and the subtle mystical awakened consciousness. So yeah, there's some overlapping adjacent communities and connections with contemplative forms and other networks that we're engaged with. But yeah, we're definitely trying to bring more space for that personal, subtle level relational mysticism, and yeah, in the many ways that can express in nature mysticism, animism. Yeah, we have a very broad Christian and not a dogmatic or tribal sense, right? Where we welcome, you know, we always say we welcome Jesus, Mary, spirit guides, saints, you know, animals. It's not boundaried into like it has to be Jesus, right? Some people, we often acknowledge that, right? Oh, Jesus might be really hard for you. So like, you know, I had a spirit guide come to me who's Danu, who's a Celtic goddess, and I needed that like non-Christian form, and she's one of my primary guides. And so yeah, there's just an aspect of like welcoming the breadth of that mystical experiential. So the Christian sense is a lineage, it's a heart rooted in love. There is, right, a rooting in Jesus, but it's very open and broad, and hopefully as integral as we can you know, learn, and that's a collective thing, right? We discern that together and hold that space, that it's not based on beliefs. It's based on how we embody that divine reality, right? How we enact the body of Christ, to use a Christian metaphor.
Which makes me wonder if there's going to be a psychedelic Christian movement.
Yeah, I know some folks who who are working in that area. Yeah.
Last month, I was in Europe for the Integral European Conference. And at the end of it, I was on the Magical Mystery Tour. And the bus pulls up to a 400- or 500-year-old church in Budapest. This place was beautiful. The energy of it. I always walk around these places like this, going, oh my God, this feels so nice. I don't know what it is, other than 400 or 500 years of people reaching for their higher selves, maybe retains. And on this bus tour was a Muslim woman in full dress from Egypt. And as I'm drifting through the church, she's crying. She was with our group. And I said, I got to go up to her and see what's going on. So I went up to her and said, what? What is it? She says, it's so beautiful. Of course, I start crying like hell with her. And in that moment, I could see so much hope, because if she could get out of her tradition and see the beauty, I think this, what we're doing, this evolutionary stuff has more legs than we appreciate. So it was a hell of a moment. The rest of the trip, all I had to do was look at her and go, and we were back there. So I just love those experiences.
Luke, I'm wondering, are there other denominations that are doing this as well? Like, kind of weaving into the integral, but sort of also holding on to wherever religious base that they're at? Is there groups that you're interfacing with?
Yeah, I mean, we have folks in our community that are a part of all sorts of different denominations and traditions, but for the most part, they're feeling entrenched or the need to go beyond those traditional institutions and structures, because they're generally not the most open or desiring to evolve. The Unity Church is definitely a primary one that we have a lot of connection with, and Shara is engaged with, and maybe some others here too. Right? They've adopted Integral, and they're Paul Smith just was meeting for a long time with their executive director, and they're kind of looking at how are we Christian? How do we do that with Integral, right? So they're wrestling with that. They're trying to find ways to evolve in that sense. But for the most part, the larger denominations and traditional structures, I haven't heard from others or seen a whole lot of desire or freedom to evolve in the midst of those structures. So
there's two things that's really interesting. I'm curious about, like, the Quakers. The Quakers are very interesting in terms of their own identification as, they are Christian, but the way they've interfaced and been in the world has been pretty complex. So that's an interesting group. Yeah. And I do know that there's a group, the Jewish Renewal, who were founded by this Rabbi Reb Zalman, who was integral. I mean, he was influenced by integral philosophy. So there's things going on out there in interesting places. So I am interested in how the quilt pieces of the institutions coming sort of similar with goals, like starting from a religion that has different base, but weaving it into an integral practice while connecting to the original practices. I'm curious about that playing out in the bigger world. So
yeah, absolutely, definitely. Yeah, Quaker mysticism is another stream of influence for me. I got into that in my 20s, and there's some of that in what we do too. There's lots of different, it's there. It just tends to be more in the smaller expressions, and the future unfolding of how those network and collaborate is something that I'm excited to see.
When I was lost and out of the church for years and didn't know where I was going, I ended up in the Center for Spiritual Living, which is Ernest Holmes' group, and there was a small group in Flagstaff that I really resonated with, and I learned a lot from them. And then I moved to LA. Now I'm in Colorado, but when I moved to Los Angeles, I couldn't find that church, and the one that wasn't very good. So I started going to an Episcopal church because they were teaching Richard Rohr's book. And I thought, I'd go to a church that teaches that. And I've never done high mass kind of churches. And I fell in love with the Episcopal church. So when I came to Colorado, there's an Episcopal church that's pretty close. So I go to an Episcopal church here, and everybody is just, they're very accepting, loving, welcoming. My son thinks they're woke. It's not a good thing, but probably a good thing for me. But they have a female priest at this church, as they had at the other one. And I just got to talk to her originally, and she wants me to do some leading of groups or whatever. But when I finished the living school, I did the same living school that Luke did, just after him. But what's happening is that at that church, there's another woman that's just graduating from the living school this year. So I have another kindred spirit that I'm involved with. There's somebody else in Colorado that I'm really, really close to was in the living school with me. So that was such an entryway to finding my spirituality. And I never did the Eucharist before, but I love it. And when I do it, I always feel so moved with the music, with the just the Eucharist of it. And it touches me every time with certain things. So you can find it wherever you want to, is what I'm saying. So.
Look, I am curious in terms of that. I mean, Cynthia Bourgeault is a really interesting integral thinker and very, very articulate about that. And I'm curious if you've had interface with how that is all playing out, in sort of the Episcopal reality there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely had some interface with Cynthia and engagement, particularly around Gebser in the last couple of years, and her engagement with that. In terms of the Episcopal Church, I mean, yeah, I also know Matthew Wright a little bit, who's part of some of her wisdom schools, and there is a real hunger for ritual, and some of the expressions that are held by these longstanding churches that they're tapping into something that's ancient and has been running, like you're talking, like Tom was talking about going to the cathedral. I mean, there is this cosmic groove, right? This channel of, and it works for some people and others it doesn't. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the Episcopal Church in and of itself, there's, I don't know, ecclesiastically, I know they've been going through a big split with and most of the churches, same with the Methodists. I mean, the crisis points that are happening at the organizational level, I think lends itself to not as much of that looking ahead to what's next or reconstruction. I'm sure there are pockets of it. I'm not as familiar with most of those, but you can find the people within them. Yeah, like Sandy was saying, I think that's what I've seen from a lot of people who come and find us, is that they may have a person here, a person there, or a few people they know who they can really connect with and resonate with, and maybe they're integral or not, but they have some kind of sense of longing for more, or a mystical experience, or some way that they connect. But it's usually that kind of scattered community, right? And so kind of the gift of the online era now with COVID and everything, we're gathering people together and we're forming these intimate communities, and then networking them up in a larger collective community. And so that way, my hope is that that can lead to more collaborative work and new possibilities arising, and maybe some of those will be in the context of certain existing structures, and some of them will be new expressions too.
I've got to go. I really want to thank you. I mean, I really appreciate everything, and then just hearing your work, and it just is so, it does reverberate in so many ways, and I'm really grateful, and I'll be kind of find my way back, because your practices I find are really very grounded and effective. So I really want to thank you, and then thank you, the Integral folks, for being part of the network, right? So I appreciate it. So thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, we need to thank Kathleen for making the connection, because she's part of that Unity of Teston. And so, yeah, appreciating her, even if she's not here. She'll hear it on the recording.
I think the one thing that I know about Integral, though, I mean, I know a lot of things about Integral, but we have all the stages inside of us. So when I meet somebody that's even tribal, I can relate to them. When I meet somebody that's amber, I can relate to them. And if we stick at that, and I know where they're coming from, then I can relate to them, and I have a beautiful experience. We share food together after church. I mean, that's what everybody, Episcopal must be known for a lot of food and things like that, but I'm really enjoying it. And, and I used to take my little granddaughter in California when I'd go, and she loved it too. So I just think we can find relationships with people no matter what level they're at, right? I mean, that's what Integral's about.
Mm-hmm.
Here. I was on a webinar with Jeff Saltzman and Nomali Pereira back in February, I think, and Suzanne Cook-Reuter, and we were talking about decolonization. You know, it's all associated with Western Europe and Catholic Christianity and the wars of religions and so on. And but at one point, I remember what you said, Sandy. I mean, how can we talk about stages without inferring that the lower stages are inferior somehow? We're all collectively groping toward ways of thinking and vocabulary that allow us to be present and non-judgmental with everybody exactly as they are. And so when I was trying to articulate, because some of you know, the whole question of stages has been challenged. It was about 2 years ago, I think, when oh gosh, Nora Bateson, you know, tossed that Molotov cocktail. Stage theory is BS, always has been, and it's colonial as hell. It's got to go. And so my creative work is very based on stages. So I really followed that controversy. And so what we ended up articulating in that webinar back in February was, I mean, I was groping toward, I said, well, I use stages as a GPS system to see where I am and where this person I'm talking to is coming from, so I understand how to understand them and connect with them. And Jeff Saltzman took that and he put in the chat something that was so beautiful, I memorized it. He said, we use stages as portals to authentic connection with other peoples and cultures. And I just, oh, wow, Jeff Saltzman, right? But that, I mean, that's kind of like this glowing bumper sticker kind of across the inside of my forehead, that with our understanding as stages, and we have to do our own shadow work here too, of course, but we can meet these people at whatever level they are and meet them genuinely. And that's one of the many beautiful things about Integral that I appreciate so much.
Yes.
You got to remember, there's healthy and unhealthy at every stage. The question is, how do you deal with the unhealthy?
Yes.
You
And
know,
we don't, and we don't do it by saying, oh, let me help you reach a higher stage. That's a subtle form of colonization. You know, I've really wrestled with this question. Our job is to try, if it is something we are called to do, is to help them be a healthy version of whatever they genuinely are. And I've learned this is where nonviolent communication comes in. It's very useful. We can actually help find out what is preventing this person from thriving. Is there something we or I can do to alleviate life conditions so that this person can be who they're supposed to be, the healthy version of themselves? And then they will go on up or not at their own rate, and that's their business. But we can help them. We can help remove conditions that prevent them from thriving at whatever stage they are. That's my current state of ignorance. That's how I'm formulating all this.
There's also modeling in it too, right?
Luke, boy, there's so much going on in this conversation. Geez, oh man. So thank you for bringing what you're bringing to us, to me. This is a nice experience for me that is pretty rare for me. So I commend you in who you've been, what you are, what you're offering. A couple things you've said that really struck with me. I think this was your phrase, relational mysticism. I love that. That's part of bringing the ineffable into the effable, which is a dance of sorts with language, with consciousness, with awareness, just a big complex dance that I keep trying to simplify, make easier. And maybe another way of saying that is something else you said is enacting the body of Christ. And I assume you mean the consciousness of Christ in that language. Regarding the earlier conversation of the word Christianity, for a few decades now, I've kind of resisted identifying as a Christian. If somebody were to ask me, I found myself trying to skirt around how do I say it and say what I really mean so that they'll understand it. Then, of course, understanding that they won't necessarily understand it. So I often now refer to not as a Christian, but an aspiring indweller of Christ consciousness. Mm-hmm. And the operative word being aspiring I'll probably be inspiring for the next few lifetimes, if not forever. Because I identify the Christ consciousness as being what Wilbur would call the clear state, the highest stage that we currently know, regardless of what state we experience it from. So it's something that, so to embody it, to enact it, that is such a challenge for me. And I assume I'm not alone in that. And I'm getting a sense that being a part of your ICN might help me get a better feel for how to be in that, as well as the doing in that. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Yeah, looking forward to having you check us out too and see, I'll add two things sparked as you're speaking around the body of Christ is about Christ consciousness, and it is in the collective sense. So it's the way that we embody that together. And that's crucial. That's such an important part of it. Yeah, the original metaphor of the body of Christ in the Christian scriptures, right, is about one person being the head and the arm saying to the eye, I don't need you. But this collective reality of participating in that in a way that is shared, that is mutual, that is relational. Yeah, so that's a big part of it, because I don't think we can individualize the Christ consciousness. Maybe, but it has to be the I, the we, and the all integrated together. We have our own place in that, but there's the universal, the relational, and the personal, individual. So, and for me, I've been really looking at that Christ consciousness as well, and feeling how this is not an ultimate statement by any means, but what delineates for me the Christ is the interfusion of the divine and the material. And so it's the incarnating presence, right? It's the materialization of the divine into the earth, into the world, into humans. And so how we do that is to embody it, right? Is to really bring it into conscious participation and integration in our embodied being, personally and collectively. But if we just focus on the personal aspect of that, right, there is that element of, okay, how do we welcome that energy in our subjective experience? And so that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do, of like, okay, how do we embody this? How do we bring it into the here and now, into participation in that divine nature?
And how do we be in a space of accepting ours and each other stumbling in our attempts to enact that? Because in some respects, it feels a little bit like children playing house, playing adult. They dress up like adults and they act like adults until mommy and daddy, or daddy comes home, whatever, then they're kids again. It feels a little like that for me. So often I catch myself as I may experience, if only briefly, a moment of being in the Christ, and then I just kind of jump out of it because I can't hold it. It's assuming that I'm even doing it at all. Maybe I'm just being a child playing an adult. That I'm just Larry trying to enact or embody the Christ consciousness. I'm willing to be constantly looking at, maybe I'm not. To not like think, oh yeah, I'm doing it now. Well, how do I like to think that I'm doing it now, but maybe I'm not. And being open to that in myself, being open to that in others, trying to, I use the word stumbling in our attempts to be in a we space with that, especially. So I appreciate the challenge of it. I appreciate the sublime joy and bliss and rapture that is in those moments of experience with it. Usually alone.
But doing that in the collective setting, that mirroring that shadow work that happens, as some of that going in the chat, like that's what keeps us in a space of humility and recognition of like, am I really embodying this? Like, what, are the fruits of the spirit, to use Christian language, right? Are those coming forth? And even this prayer, this practice we did, this resonating prayer, we call it golden shadow work. Because we're seeing the goodness in one another, and then as our we space groups grow in intimacy and over time, there's space there as well for other forms of shadow work, right? To mirror back and reflect one another. Most of the time we need that being seen and held in love, and that's certainly what we focus on. But we definitely don't want to bypass the the ways that we all stumble and don't do it. And there's hopefully not a lot of illusions of grandiosity, but we are trying to claim that divine nature. And so what does that look like to hold that with humility, and knowing that we need a collective, we need a community to really be able to see that well and accurately, because I don't know that we can. I know in the past I've really struggled in that individually, right? Like, because who is to say, is this, well, I'm having this feeling, I'm having this sensation, right? So I'm creating a value judgment based on that, or, trying to take all the things that I've read and, make sense out of that and come to wisdom and discernment and understanding. But that's always a collective process. And same with the question of what is healthy and unhealthy. I mean, I think that has to be that's again why the collective, why the community is a huge part of the focus of our work, because that individualism is toxic to to seeing those things. I mean, we can't do it. That's the nature of the shadow, right? So
amen to that. And I would just add that the communities need to be in community with other communities, because whole communities can go off the rails too.
Oh, definitely.
Just like we can as
Communal
individuals.
shadow. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it seemed like the exercise we did with centering on each of these, each person, it was like medicine. There was some. I didn't experience it like maybe Sandy's here, she could speak to it, but that's what it felt like to me. Like we were like applying some verbal cosmic or divine acupuncture to the people that were being witnessed.
Yeah, and that's so much better than trying to come to the right thought or idea. I mean, that has its value too. I enjoy that, and that's a part of it, right? But like, I don't know. I feel like we long for that. We need that. It's like so I'm an Enneagram 5, for those who, I seek that mental clarity. I want to have the understanding, right? I get into group discussions and say, oh, where can we get to the truth and the wisdom? And, growing up in my religious expressions, the Bible study was the big thing. And, look at the, okay, that's good and wonderful and stuff. But like that never fed me. I'll use that language just as a Christian way, but like that didn't nourish the soul in ways that this sort of practice. I mean, that again, like you can't conjure up the energy of the divine as in a solo sense, right? That love has to be given, and sometimes we can receive that in a mystical, spiritual sense, and yet I think it's so much more palpable and powerful when we can welcome it in a relational sense. And we all long for that, and we have that innate capacity and ability within us, right? That's an element of the divine nature that I think is just, we don't stumble through. Like, we are built for love. I believe that, right? I believe in the deepest heart of each one of us is that connection, that love. And so if we can make space for it, if we can draw that forth, then in a communal space, we're welcoming our divine being in that way.
A distinction I use that helps keep me sane about it is we can have capacity, but it doesn't mean we have capability yet. So capacity is just the groundwork, and we've developed capability out of that. And I think the capability developmental line is a long line, especially in terms of embodying Christ consciousness.
And we talk about that a lot, where the collective enhances the capacity of the individual, right? We come into a We Space group and we're able to experience something on a level that's bigger and broader and deeper than what we can do on our own. And that then expands our personal individual consciousness, so that when we then go do that on our own, which we're never really on our own, right? But when we're participating it just by ourselves, then our capacity is enhanced from that collective experience. So yeah, it's both growing that capacity and then, yeah, like you said, also developing those skills and capabilities to continue to enact in the.
Well, I can certainly attribute today as a very heartfelt experience, just receiving the love from everybody. And I know I'm saying it again, but it felt beautiful today. So yeah, I mean, I know I was in We Space for a little while. I got so busy with everything else that I was doing that, this one might come back, but we'll see.
Always welcome back. Yeah.
Yeah. We're getting close to waiting time here, but I want to offer for people who haven't spoke, Mary or Eric, if you'd like to chime in before we close out, or any reflections or anything that you'd like to share. Not necessary either, so. But there's space if you like it, if you like.
Okay, it feels like I shared, I certainly shared in the groups. And I'm, yeah, I've been doing the We Space groups for 3 years. We completed, I think I shared all that already. This is good stuff. Thank you, Luke.
Yeah, I almost didn't show up for this, which would be rare for me because I always show up for these SDIs. So I'm thinking, okay, somebody else doing the mysticism stuff and the prayer and the meditation. Well, here we go again. It's been there, done that. So old, so old. So thank you for, again, I just want to reiterate, Luke, I get there's an essence you're bringing that is definitely integral, maybe probably even turquoise. Maybe even indigo, the next, which is that unitive quality that starts to come into our consciousness instead of the duality. So, yeah, I just want to commend you again. Thank you. And I'm really glad I showed up.
Glad you did.
Yeah, I would echo what Larry's saying. I'm really glad I showed up tonight. I wasn't sure I was going to tonight. Yeah, my long journey with Christianity and some of the allergies that get in the way, there was just sort of this like, no, I really want to do that. And then I thought, no, I want to expand myself. And I'm really glad. I really appreciate the way you're holding this and approaching this whole thing, Luke. It's opened up things for me, and some of what you were saying at the end in particular about the communal practice and how I need that, because as probably an Enneagram 5 myself, there's that individual, and knowledge, and there's a certain orientation that I have, and to bring that more into the relational spaces, I think is an important area for me to grow. So this has really been a valuable session for me. I'm, quite pleasantly surprised and delighted and grateful to have been part of this tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Luke,
Glad you're here.
I just want to thank you once again for this evening. It was special. And these meetings are always special. And a lot of people had to drop out because they had to fix dinner. I hid and muted myself and ate dinner while we were progressing with this conversation, because the conversation after the presentation is as valuable as, well, maybe not, Luke. This was really valuable, but once again, thank you so much, not just for your contribution, but for everyone else who participated.
Yeah. It's
wonderful, lovely level of thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to thank everyone for co-creating this field and adding to the richness and love and wisdom in our midst. This was really a beautiful, wonderful evening. So thank you all. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
And hope to see you next month with Jeff Fitch. So,
okay.
Thank you all.
More We Space stuff.
Oh, Sandy, you were great. I'm an ex-Episcopalian, and I relate to what you said. I'm contemplating going back. And the Gregorian
Well,
chant.
it's only certain Episcopal churches, I think, that are inclusive, so.
Sometimes I have to go to a Catholic church to get my Episcopalian fix.
Okay.
I'll consider that a gauntlet thrown. I haven't been back to a church for quite a while, but.
Well, the Gregorian chant is something my brother was an Episcopal priest, and the church in his town did a lot of stuff like the Gregorian chant. And that was Seattle. I'm in Sacramento. Too bad.
Oh, Gregorian chant can be consciousness altering.
Yes, it can, and it is, and it's so peaceful. I have some, and it turns my apartment into a temple. It's the open fifths, the progressive, the open fifths and the fourths.
Yeah, I go with the kirtan kind of stuff, the
nice.
Hindu mysticism kind of chanting.
Right.
Lynn, have you found a good spot to go in Sacramento? I'm not far from there.
Well, I got going with the meditation group that Karen participates in, and wasn't going anywhere because it conflicted with our meditation group. But one of the things that we would say when we were talking about the meditation group is you don't have to leave your church to do the meditation, because the church has its rules and regs, but the meditation is international and covers, it's just a technique on how to meditate that doesn't honor any particular set of rules and regulations the way religions do. So I was saying that in talks, and then I thought, I got to walk the talk. And so I found a Unity Church. And what I liked about the Unity Church was they had a sign out in front that says, "One God, many paths." And that I appreciate. And they also said everyone's welcome, no exceptions. And I appreciate that too. So.
And that's specifically, where is that? What is that?
That is the Spiritual Life Center.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And, another one is in West Sacramento, and that's Science of Mind stuff, I believe, although I haven't been there myself. It's very active. Karen's waving her hand. I yield to Karen. What do you say?
No, I think we're all needing to go.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you all.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.